Welcome to Foundation. If you'd like to get this episode early, sign up at the URL below. Today we're talking to Chris Sacca, a guy that was over $2 million in debt, is now turned into one of the biggest angels in the valley. Let's talk to him. So let's start at the beginning. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Lockport, New York, a little town outside of Buffalo. On a glacial escarpment, you can actually see Toronto from the house I grew up in. So I grew up in this weird kind of hybrid between the US and Canada. So half my music came from across the border, half the food we ate, that kind of stuff. So yeah, very small town, small high school, small town living.
Did you go to college out there, or where did you go to school?
I ended up leaving there to go to school in DC. I went to the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown. So I wanted to be like a diplomat or ambassador or spy, something like that.
Nice.
So I went to school to study for those kinds of roles. I lived abroad. I lived in Latin America. I lived in Europe. And then when it came time to graduate, I realized that spies don't make enough money to pay back their student loans.
Right.
And I had to borrow all the money to go to college, so I had to go straighten out my act and figure out some kind of real career.
And so what was the first big job that you got?
Well, I didn't interview for any traditional jobs. I didn't even know what investment banking was. I didn't know any of those traditional routes to go down. I wanted to start a company. I didn't know any VCs. I didn't grow up with any money. And so I realized that the easiest way to get my hands on startup money would be to apply to grad school. In grad school, when they give you the student loans, they actually send you the check, and then it's up to you to cash it and pay the school.
That's done. They still don't do that way, right?
I don't know, but I got these big loan checks, and I cashed them and I used them to start a really, what in hindsight was a really crappy company with a bad idea. But when the registrar's like, hey, where's our tuition money? I'm like, oh, those checks must have been lost in the mail. Let me go track those down.
So what was the company? I'm curious.
I was trying to do two things. So one was, all these class action lawsuits always happen. You get like a little thing in the mail.
And no one ever sends them in.
Yeah, I wanted to aggregate all the class action lawsuits in one place so that you could come to my site and figure out whether you're eligible for all these different class action lawsuits that have come up. And you get coupons and cash payments. But on some of the bigger class action lawsuits, the lawyers actually get money if they can bring you in. So the highest value keyword on Google forever has been mesothelioma, which is a rare form of asbestos-related cancer that there are these multi-billion-dollar settlements for. And if you come forward with mesothelioma, it's because you're exposed to asbestos. A lawyer brings in that lawsuit, he gets like 30 grand that day.
Yeah, I used to see TV commercials for that all the time.
Yeah, right.
Probably most people are dead now, so they're not running them.
Really high-value conversion, though. Right. So high-value ads. So anyways, there's lots of those kinds of suits out there, and I wanted to create one place, and I called it Cash Action.
Amazing.
Which is, just brutal. But, and so I kind of ended up in law school by accident. I didn't really have aspirations of being a lawyer, but I needed access to money to go start something, and that was the quickest way to do it.
Right. And so how did you pay back how did you get the funding then if you were spending on your startup?
So I realized my startup was pretty sucky. I also realized I didn't really have the skills to build this thing. I didn't have any partners. I was in Washington, D.C., where there isn't really a startup community, or there wasn't then.
Right.
This is the late 90s. And so I luckily pulled the plug before I ran out of all the money. And then I started kind of day trading the money, basically. And what was amazing was
day trading your college tuition money.
Yeah. Amazing. I was in the hole. I needed to make it back and pay tuition and stay in law school. So what was fun was
late 90s, you said?
Yeah.
Well, this is a good time to
It was exactly the right time to do this. So the online trading platforms hadn't really caught up with different ways. They hadn't baked in all the regulations. So there's a leverage regulation called Reg T. And Reg T says if you have $100 in your account, you can buy $200 worth of stock, so 50% leverage. Well, the online trading platforms hadn't really caught up and built in that limitation. So basically, if you had $100 in your account, you could buy $1 million worth of stock. And then you actually own that stock for 7 days. And what they do is issue a margin call. So somebody would actually call you and say, hey, are you going to send us the other 990?
Right.
And you're like, yeah, sure, I'm right on. I just got to transfer from another account. And then you own that stock for 7 days.
Right.
And
then you hopefully flip it at that time.
And so 98.99 was a really good time to do that. And so
that's insane.
I made ridiculous sums of money. And then in the spring of 2000, my entire plan crashed, and I went from...
As did the market at that time.
Yeah. In basically a week-long, like 72 hours of a week-long period, I went from being about $12 million to the good to $4 million in the hole, like that.
So if you're up 12 million, why don't you just say, you know what, I'm cashing out, I'm going in freaking bonds, like.
Right. You remember that book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad?
Yeah.
Okay, take it away from dad and make it like rich bro, poor bro. So I'm surrounded by all these buddies who are like limo drivers, bartenders. All my buddies are like, dude, you're amazing. You picked such amazing stocks. They're going to the moon. I just bought a boat by following your picks, et cetera. Like, amazing. I was in this echo chamber of people like convincing me that I was a genius and convincing me that I was doing it right. And when things are going well, you're always convinced it's because you've somehow impacted them. When things are going bad, you always want to chalk it up to bad luck, right? When in reality, I think we sometimes realize, like, when things go really well, it's because, holy shit, our number came up and we got lucky. And when things go bad, we go do a postmortem and realize we screwed it all up, right? And so at the time, I've just got all these people around me reinforcing that I'm a stock picking genius. And and every time I make another bet, I make more money. I mean, the market had been like this for 18 months. And by sheer chance, I happened to be invested in the highest performing stock in the NASDAQ for like 1999.
What was that?
Called FirstCom. It was a Latin American telco. It was a CLAC. Like, I basically understood telecom and I spoke Spanish, and all these things triangulate to me being like, oh, of course I'm making money in this stock.
Right.
When really it's all a load of bullshit. And like, I was riding that bubble wave like everybody. So it completely explodes.
So how deep were you at that point? You're 4 million in the hole?
Yeah.
And so this is you as an independent investor. You're not, are you an LLC? Are you a...
No, it was me.
Just all on you.
Yeah, all
So you're going
trading
bankruptcy. You're like, I'm out. Like chapter 12.
Yeah, but the problem was, if you go bankrupt, you can't ever be an officer of a public company. It's hard for you to keep a law license. Like, it's a big thing if you're raising venture money. Yeah.
So Trump can't ever be an officer?
No. If you go personally bankrupt, this is a big sting on you. And so later when you go to raise money, it's a big ding on you. And like an investment bank will
look at your credit history and your,
I mean, because that's public record.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, and so that's a big sting. And I also was just like, look, I can fight my way out of this. So, I went back to some of those banks and I negotiated it to 2.125 million. It turned out they'd done some shady trading for themselves that day, like traded for their own accounts, didn't give me the best price and that kind of stuff. So we agreed on 2.125. And starting the year 2000, at 25 years old, without any money to my name and no network to fall back on, I had to dig myself out of a $2.125 million hole.
How do you dig out of that?
A lot.
You had your degree. You were.
I ended up getting a law degree. Yeah, I ended up getting a law degree. I only went for the exams, but I ended up being a pretty good student. So I did really well in the exams. I got this degree, so it was bankable. I came out here to Silicon Valley, got a job at Fenwick and West. Was working as an attorney during the day, and at night I was freelancing, doing anything I possibly could. I did voiceover work. I was writing business plans, helping people sell stuff.
Voiceover work for what?
Yeah, people would put up voiceover gigs on Elance. Do you remember Elance?
Yeah, I remember Elance. I use that.
Dude, I was one of the very first contractors on Elance, doing anything I could for $50 here, $200 there, $1,000 there. And so I just did anything I could to kind of scrap some money. I was grabbing equity from startups I was advising and writing business plans for. I went to every single business networking event in Silicon Valley, every Churchill Club type thing. I wore the same sport coat. And I'd go to these places, I'd sneak in through the kitchen because I can speak Spanish and I couldn't afford the entry fee up front.
Right.
And I'd sneak in there and press the flash and make eye contact with everybody and introduce myself and like do anything I could to possibly build a network. What was happening at the time though is it was funny because I had a business card that said Chris Sacca on it. And everyone would be like, you're a good kid, something will come up for you, you know, and then they'd walk away and I was like, shit, I don't need something like in a couple months. Like, I'm skids right now. Like, I can barely make rent right now. In fact, like, I survived at Fenwick, I think 13 months before I got laid off with everybody else from my hiring class 4 days before September 11th. So I'm like totally dead broke. I have no employment. September 11th not only directly sucks for all the people affected by that, but the economy ground to a halt out here.
Yeah.
You couldn't even get a U-Haul out of Silicon Valley back then because they'd all been taken already and none were coming back in. So you couldn't even move yourself out if you wanted to move back in with your mom and dad. There was nothing to put your shit in.
That's funny because at that time I was living with my mom and dad. And I just got a job for Tech TV like a month after that, and then I finally moved back out. But yeah,
it was brutal.
We were both out hard times.
Right. Those are really tough times. And so here I am trying to slug it out, and I've got this business card that says Chris Sacca, and everyone's like, oh, it'll come together for you, kid. And I'm like, I don't need it like long term. I need something now.
Right.
So I came up with this idea to build an entity that I called the Salinger Group. It just sounded mnemonic. I went through a bunch of domains, the way you look at domains and stuff like that. And I was like, the Salinger Group has a nice ring to it. I had now Crystal, who's my fiance, she's been my best friend forever. And so she drew up a logo. It was really slick. I had a guy off Elance build a website for me.
Amazing.
And I just went into business as
What
a
did you
Salinger
claim
Group.
to do? Like, what was your...
My website said a whole lot of nothing. Like, if somebody goes to like the Wayback Machine, you might see it. It's really awesome. It says nothing. It says, we advise blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And so, and I didn't have any physical address or any phone number because I was living in a piece of shit hovel in Foster City that cost me like $800 a month.
Right.
And so I set about as a Salinger Group, and my name was Chris Sacca, principal of the Salinger Group. And I went to the same networking events with this card, and I'd hand it to people. And they're like, oh yeah, the Salinger Group, I know you guys. You guys do good work. We'd love to collaborate with you on this project. It was pure psychology, and suddenly
That's awesome.
I'm getting gigs. Suddenly I was doing work, and it panned out for me. And through that avenue, I ended up getting really involved in startups, and I ended up with a full-time gig at a company called Spidera that was competing with Akamai. And I was an executive there. I had a bunch of different executive roles, and then Google found me there, and then I ended up at Google.
So tell me about your Google experience. What year did you join? Was that pre-IPO or?
It was pre-IPO, but I got there in the fall of 2003 when they'd already figured out how valuable the stock options were and stopped giving out free candy to everybody.
Right.
So people got there like 6 months before I did, left worth $20 million. And I left worth like $1.5 million to $2 million. So no complaints, but I didn't.
You paid back your debt.
I did, actually.
Yeah.
By the way, the full circle in that story is after the Google IPO, after my old company Spidera got sold, after some other equity cashed in, I finally got my net worth back to zero in February of 2005.
Wow.
So I had a BYOB party, and the very last debt I paid back was to Sallie Mae, the student loan provider. And you'll actually see, like, I overpaid it by accident by $23.82. And that check from them is still on my fridge at home right now, because I kind of like that Sallie Mae owes me money. So it came full circle.
That's
and you'll
awesome.
never, I've said this before, but you'll never feel richer than when you make it back to $0.
Yeah.
Like when you've been in the hole and suddenly you're worth $0, you're like, fuck yeah. I can chart
Absolutely.
my own course right now.
Yeah, I had a period of time where Prager was lending me money, and I had a car repossessed. Like it was bad there for a little while.
Yeah.
But
You get back to zero and you're like, dude, I could join the Peace Corps right now. Nobody's gonna track me down.
Yeah.
Like I got choices again.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So how, before we get into the Google stuff, how important do you think for others it is to network and go to these events? And I mean, do you find that was your key driver for becoming who you are today?
I mean, I don't think that was the key driver for.
Or
I
breaking
think I
into
grew up,
the industry,
yeah.
I should say.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up like tenacious and determined and like just unwilling to accept defeat, right? I mean, chalking up losses along the way, but unwilling to accept defeat. Like those are hallmarks of just how I was raised, who I was as an athlete, who I was as a young student. I've always been a pain in the ass. I've always kind of poked people and weaseled my way into their situations and stuff like that and tried to prove I was helpful. But I think being in those settings, in the beginning it started as networking, right? Like when you're outside the circle, you're like, I'm gonna build up my network and I'm just gonna build up the largest collection of email addresses and phone numbers I can possibly have. And this is kind of pre-LinkedIn and there were other weird little social circles back then and Friendster and stuff like that. But I think a lot of that became a little bit empty. I think what really ended up building a brand for me or a business opportunity for me was just being known as being helpful. And so, I think going to all those events gave me a sense of the challenges that people were facing and kind of highlighted to me that, wow, I can solve some of those things. I mean, often where you're most talented, it doesn't occur to you until you meet somebody who's got that problem. And they're like, damn, you're helpful or bright, or that was a great insight, or that's really good feedback. And you're like, well, that kind of came second nature to me. And then you see these other skills of theirs that are really intimidating, and yet they don't even realize they're that awesome about that thing. And so I think being exposed to people kind of really established this idea for me that if I can just be helpful, I'll get invited into these situations. I mean, we're really lucky in Silicon Valley that nobody asks you, other than at the beginning of a podcast like this, like where you went to school. Nobody asks you what your parents do for a living. Nobody asks you your credential. And instead, they're just kind of like, how can you help me right now? Like, I'm in the weeds. I need some help. What's your feedback on this? And if you're insightful and you're helpful, people just grab you and they pull you in. And so I think that's how, if I had one thing that I think has been the secret to the opportunities that have come for me, it's just being helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the things that I've tried to do as well. And it's funny, there's a story I have with Jack Dorsey when Square, and I wanted to get into Square really bad because I loved the idea when I first heard about it. But I mean, they were well on their way to building a prototype, and they had raised a bunch of cash, or had started to put together that angel syndicate of people doing their first round. There was no room to get in.
Right.
And so Graham and I actually shot a really awesome little HD video demoing the device. And at the time, they didn't have any videos online, blah, blah, blah.
I saw it. I remember it.
I showed it to Jack, and he's like, holy shit, like, that's awesome. And like, I started helping him out with some other things, and all of a sudden, he's like, you know what? I got a little room for you to get in here, because you've been really helpful for, you know, launching this product. So yeah, I agree with that 100%.
I think you're not only helpful, but I think another one of my rules, when people kind of tweet me and say, how do I get into the game, et cetera, I'm just like, create value before you ask for value back. And so that's, your story is the epitome of that. It's, you didn't ask any permission, you didn't have a pre-existing deal with Jack, he wasn't giving you shares to do that. You're just like, look, I think this is a cool opportunity, I think it's a cool product that you believed in already, and it was consistent with like your brand and what your audience cares about.
Right.
And so you're like, I'm gonna put together something here that I think is helpful, and I'm not gonna ask anything back in exchange for it. And what it does is just opens the door for a much more meaningful relationship and a much more lucrative relationship for you. I mean, is you ended up getting in on that round.
Yeah.
And it's blown up. And
Yeah.
so I think that's the formula sometimes is, you know, when people write me and ask me for advice and stuff, I'm like, just go to every event you can find, hobnob anywhere you can find, not just other loudmouth biz devy people or anything like that, but go hang where hackers are hanging, and you'll find they have issues that may come second nature to somebody who's not actually a code writer.
Right.
And don't ask them for stock up front, just start helping them.
Right.
You know, just show up. And you'll find like that's, I mean, do you know who Ryan Graves is? He's our GM at Uber, an amazing, amazing entrepreneur, sheer hustle, right? Right before Travis and Garrett kind of got him to come out and really start the operations, the day-to-day operations at Uber, where he's now the #2 executive, he really wanted a job at Foursquare. And so he'd applied through the main channels, he didn't really get the attention he wanted. So he went around Chicago and he signed up 20 mayor deals. He didn't ask Foursquare for permission. He just went to the venues and said, can you do something for the mayor?
Insane.
Then he went to New York and he presented those mayor deals to Dennis and Tristan and was like, hey, I've been out hustling in Chicago. I just signed you up 20 big venues with mayor deals. Like, how money is that?
That's
like,
awesome.
If somebody shows up in your office with that kind of deal, like that
You're
guy's gonna get a job
you're
interview.
Be super stoked to give him a job, or like super creeped out and pissed.
Right.
You know, you're
but
like,
I think it sometimes takes that edge, right? I mean, your inbox looks like my inbox. It's a mess, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard to sort, you know, the wheat from the chaff. But
for sure.
when somebody takes those kinds of steps,
and
really kind of shows right up front their value.
I had a guy redesign, a really good designer, redesign Foundation's website, which I haven't put live yet, but I mean, it's amazing. And it's like just way better than what I have today. And so like, I didn't even ask this person or know who this person was, and they just went out and did it.
Yeah.
Sent it to me and like, what do you think? And that started that dialogue. So
yeah.
Cool, so talking about Google.
Dude, Google was the opportunity of a lifetime. I mean, I loved it there. I didn't even
What was your role? What did you get hired in as?
I got hired in to buy data centers. They needed someone who was a business guy, technical, and a lawyer all in one. And they basically gave me and another guy a big budget and said, go away, don't tell anyone you work for Google. We want to buy a bunch of data centers because we need all this server capacity, and we don't want Microsoft to know how big this business is getting. And so like
That's crazy.
And so it was really crazy and really fun because the scale of Google's business.
So you're like, I'm gonna use pull out my old business cards with that old LLC that you created.
I did do deals on behalf of the Salinger Group. There's
Amazing.
no doubt. And so we would pick an area. The guy who worked with me on this is this guy, Ericus Napius, who's really technical and amazing guy. And we would pick a geographic area, and then he and I would hit the ground, visit all these different places, look at fiber availability, power, the tax regimes there, and then we'd start negotiating with like local city officials and stuff like that to give us access to land or let us use that old aluminum smelter, get us a high voltage line in here, where are we going to buy transformers? Are they going to come off eBay and stuff like that?
At what point did they figure out you were Google? I mean, did you come in here even saying that, or like you're like, I'm going to wire you this funds?
Literally at the last moment.
At the last second.
Yeah. And we're talking about commitments that were in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
Right.
Like at one point,
you could probably negotiate a little bit better not being Google, right? Acting like you're an independent and you don't have deep pockets.
Yeah. That said, the Department of Homeland Security was called on us once, and they visited my partner on this stuff because they're like, there's two guys driving around in rental cars around the state of Oregon asking a lot about high voltage lines and power capacity and fiber optics. Like, we think these guys might be Al Qaeda.
Right.
So, but yeah, that was just amazing. And so, and Google considered that a really core function. I mean, our team had just unprecedented capital and freedom to operate. And I worked for David Drummond, who is the head of business and corporate development and the general counsel at the time. And he's just an amazing guy to study under. And I kind of dotted line to this guy, Urs Holso, who was like the first engineering lead at Google. And so just learning about this, and we were just pushing the envelope of how much power you could extract out of a data center, like how much computing power and stuff. And it was fun to be part of the core engineering function there.
That was a super secret thing for a while, right? They didn't show what types of machines were being put in these data centers.
Yeah.
It was all your own proprietary stuff.
Yeah, and it was
right?
very experimental. Some of the engineers who worked in that group were just off the charts, brilliant. And so they were experimenting with shipping containers filled with servers. They were like, what if we filled a data center with helium? Would that actually, what if we water-cooled servers? I mean, literally water-cooled. Sergey had the idea of buying a decommissioned aircraft carrier and loading it with servers and floating out to the middle of the ocean and using ocean water to cool it and stuff like that. I mean, these guys, like, the environment at Google was such that cast off all the traditional constraints in the product process. Right. And then what would you build to solve a solution?
Right.
Like, forget about money, bandwidth, server, storage, forget about all that stuff. And even more importantly, forget about who it might piss off, right? So Gmail was developed at the time when AOL was one of Google's biggest customers, biggest partners. Like, if it were up to AOL, there's no way Gmail would have ever launched, right? But it was awesome, it was innovative, it changed the way we thought about mail. And so they just had free range to just go push that thing out. And so, I mean, I eventually transitioned out of doing those data center deals to doing, I was called head of special projects. And so I did everything from helping people start stuff like Google Talk, doing some of their first business deals. I did the first Google video, paid business deals. We did a promotion with NBC for the Olympics that made $732 actually for a big Olympics video.
Wow.
I spent more on my flight to get over there to celebrate the deal we did.
I don't understand. Was that like net after?
No. You could actually. It was the worst video deal of all times because basically it was a highlight reel from NBC that you, the user, could pay us for. And so, like, can you imagine?
Was that when
money
Google
for that?
Video was charging or something?
Yeah.
Or you were experimenting with charging for certain videos?
Yeah. So I did the first and worst of those deals.
That's amazing.
We had all this fanfare. Like, here we are being friendly to a big premium partner. We're doing this great deal. We're helping them monetize their content.
Right. You thought you were going to make a ton of money off doing the deal? It's like 50 people signed up for it.
Pretty much.
Well, I mean, it's free content everywhere else, though, right? I mean, everyone's watching on TV.
Yeah, just video is still establishing itself, but I did some stinker deals over there.
Yeah.
But I also led stuff like the wireless stuff. So I did the free Wi-Fi for Mountain View, and then I led the Spectrum group. And so
why didn't that ever spread outside of Mountain View? Because there was this big deal, like Google's doing free Wi-Fi, and then there was speculation that might also take place in other cities, and it just never came to be. Like,
so my goal was never to make that a ubiquitous service. What happened was, at the time, we all realized we need better internet access to our homes and offices, right? And net neutrality is a real problem. If you've only got one internet access provider, and they start monkeying with the apps you can visit, that's a real problem.
Right.
When there's choice, it keeps them honest, right? But at the time I started that group, 60% of Americans had access to 1 or 0 broadband providers. That's it. So if they don't have choice, prices are too high, service levels are low, and net neutrality is looming. And so there were these communities that were starting to pursue municipal broadband to like put up Wi-Fi for the people in their communities. And they were getting sued by SBC and Verizon. I'm like, this is such bullshit. Like, here these communities are trying to get into providing bandwidth as a right, not a privilege, and they're actually getting sued by the telcos. Like,
it's because they were saying
it was anti-competitive, that kind of stuff, like a municipality competing with a private company.
Right.
And so I said, and then they were putting all this FUD, like all this doubt around the product, like it doesn't work, you can't provide Wi-Fi on a big scale. And so I went to Larry and Sergey and was like, this is bullshit. We can actually, with a demonstration project, we can cut through all this stuff. I dare Verizon and SBC to sue us for doing this right now. It'd be the greatest thing that ever happened to Google. And we can provide free ubiquitous Wi-Fi and show that the technology actually works.
You're a private company too, so why not, right?
Yeah.
You just...
And so we built this network in Mountain View. Mountain View's a town that has 70,000 people.
It still works today, right?
It still works today.
Yeah,
I think they get between 15
through.
and 20,000 users a day on that network.
Is it capped at a certain amount of like megs a second?
No, it's I mean, I haven't kept in touch with it for the last. I left Google in 2007, so I haven't really kept up on it. My friends still run it, but and it was cool. It also gave Google some cred, so that when it did go into discussions with the operators about net neutrality, it's like, look, we actually know what it's like to have people abusing a network. Like, we've got people running torrent on this thing all day. We know what it's like to have people pegging it. And we've been dealing with that. We're E911 compliant and all this kind of stuff,
Yeah.
CALIA, and so it was pretty cool. But from there, I went and ran the group that bid $4.7 billion in the FCC auction for the Spectrum licenses.
That was just recently, though. That wasn't.
No. That was the bid actually went in just after I left Google. So,
but it didn't go through, or it did?
Fall of 2007. It didn't. Verizon. It was a big poker hand, right?
Right.
Google doesn't necessarily want to own a bunch of Spectrum. We were willing to because it would allow us to do some cool things, but Google's not in the business of building big Spectrum networks.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, the carriers who owned all the Spectrum were acting like assholes and trying to get in between you and the apps you wanted, right? I mean, you'll remember it wasn't that long ago that certain carriers wouldn't allow you to download Google Maps for mobile, right? And you're like, wait, this is clearly the best app. Why am I forced using your shitty thing, et cetera? I mean, it wasn't, the app ecosystem didn't exist the way it exists today.
Right.
And so we got in there and we're like, maybe we can force their hands. So we proposed all these openness rules that should be attached to this new Spectrum that was being auctioned. And the FCC was willing to go along with it. And the Verizon AT&T guys were like, no, that's bullshit. You can't just let some posers from out in Silicon Valley dictate the rules for this.
Right.
And so one of the guys at Google in my group, Rick Witt, came up with this idea. He's like, well, what if we just pony up the reserve price and keep these guys honest?
Right.
And we're like, holy shit, that's ballsy and brilliant. So we put together a plan. Larry and Sager are like, hell yeah, this is so crazy. Let's do it. So we wrote to the FCC and we said, if you adopt these rules, we guarantee we will bid at least $4.7 billion in the auction for the Spectrum. So the auction starts. And we bid, Verizon bids, and we bid, and it was high stakes. There was a whole war room set up for this.
That's insane.
And but ultimately, the game theory was to make Verizon eat the Spectrum subject to these rules, right? Mm-hmm. That has the greatest benefit for the greatest number of people.
Yeah.
And it was fun, but it was just that's the kind of that's an example of what it was like to work at Google.
So why'd you leave?
I asked myself that a lot after I left. So one, I'd vested. I mean, I'd been there 4 years. Two is, as a company gets bigger, people really want you to specialize. And I'm kind of like you, I'm a generalist. I like doing more than one thing at a time. I like learning about multiple spaces. Mm-hmm. And in the beginning, that was possible. I kind of would get to float. I'd do data centers, and I'd go check in with these other products, and I'd do an M&A deal, and I'd do a speech on behalf of the company, and I kind of was constantly learning. And I could just, at Google, you could invite yourself to meetings in the early days. And if you saw a meeting that was interesting on the counter, you just show up and learn about something. As it got bigger, I would show up to a YouTube meeting and I was like, what are you doing here? You're the wireless guy. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm kind of the video guy too. And I kind of do Hollywood shit.
Right.
And people, as companies get bigger, start defining themselves by their territory, not by the overall mission. And that's frustrating. Politics creep in and I didn't get to float as much. And so
what'd you jump to after that? Was that straight into your current gig, or?
I jumped straight into holy shit, did I really just quit my job at Google? Oh my God, what did I do? I started writing a few angel checks, which when you're worth $1.5 million are pretty material, writing $25,000 checks. So I was only writing them to the companies I really thought I could impact.
Right.
I'd done a little angel investing before that. I did Photobucket was my first deal and Twitter was my second deal. So that worked out pretty well. But the next few deals I did after I left Google were pretty shitty.
When did you decide, so you started doing angel stuff, when did you decide to actually raise a fund?
Yeah, I mean, you've had this experience as an angel investor where you want to put in $25K, but the terms of the deal are already set. Or you discover something really cool. I know you find stuff all the time, and you're like, this is really rad. But if you're going to put in $25K, that's not enough to get it done and get the company back to work. Instead, what I found was I would find something really rad. So in one case, FanBridge. I discovered this company that connects bands and their fans by email and text messages. When I met these guys, I literally sent out a tweet, by the way, late on a Friday night. I was busting my ass late on a Friday night. And I was like, I'm working late on a Friday night. Anyone out there got a bootstrapped, profitable startup who's also working late on a Friday night? And these guys are like, we do. And I'm like, come on. And so it turns out they're in New York. I fly out to see them in New York. These guys, two guys, they had day jobs, and they had a tech lead in Argentina who they'd never met in real life. And when I met them, they had 28 million users, 28 million opt-ins to the site who they were delivering email to on a weekly basis.
Wow.
I was like, holy shit. They'd never even met their tech lead, right? Fast forward to today, they have about 150 million opt-ins. They're adding 250,000 a day, and I think they have a team of 10 or 12.
That's insane.
But so I meet these guys. It's the deal of a lifetime. I want nothing more than to be able to give them the money to quit their day jobs and focus exclusively on this thing. And yet, I can't write more than a $50,000 check without being incredibly irresponsible.
Right.
And so instead I have to go into fundraising mode and I have to go convince everybody else to go in the deal.
Right.
And I was hearing excuses from everybody. Like,
this is what I do today.
Yeah.
I send an email to like 15 people. I'm like, come on, you guys got to get on this.
You sent me one today. I don't feel as special anymore.
Oh yeah, I did send you one today. That's right.
But no, like you end up doing this and instead of being as helpful as you can on the product, on the front page, on conversion, on that stuff, you end up being in fundraising mode. And in this particular case, like everybody I talked to already had something in their portfolio they thought was a conflict or they couldn't get over it, or it's in New York and I don't invest in New York, you know.
Right. You
that
have
kind
a
of stuff.
fund, you can do 150 or whatever you want and do the whole thing.
Right. And so that was one a buddy of mine who'd been involved back in my old company, Spidera, has a big fund. It was like, dude, let me give you a few $1 million. I was like, I don't know how to manage other people's money. I don't have a back office. And he's like, you use my back office, the administrative component. I was like, oh,
that's awesome.
That's interesting. Yeah. So these guys it's Hans Swildens from Industry Ventures and his partners Mike Ridley and Will Quist are just like, use our infrastructure, we'll give you some money, go raise the rest. So I put together a fund in a few weeks and blew it out. It's been really fun. I mean, we're up multiples on that fund, and since then I've gone on to build some other funds, some for special purposes and some a little broader. Yeah.
So I want to ask you about some stuff you may or may not be able to talk about. How's the tea, by the way? I mean, that's especially
pretty good, actually. I like it.
Good stuff.
I'm not a tea guy. It's so subtle. I'm not a very subtle person.
You don't drink any coffee at all or anything?
No coffee ever.
So how do you get up in the morning and have energy? Like, just naturally spray
I guess, yeah. Caffeine just puts me on that cycle where I go on a 3-state killing spree and then I just crash and can't move any of my muscles. So
I'm the same way. I shouldn't drink caffeine, too much caffeine. I had like a coffee and 3 teas today. I'm about to bounce off walls.
I can't do it.
You can't tell, but I'm going crazy inside. So what were we talking about? I'm scatterbrained now.
You were asking about rumors.
Yes, so rumors.
I'm probably not supposed to remind him he was asking about rumors.
Exactly. So there's speculation that you own somewhere around 10% of Twitter. A big number. You do that out of a fund, right? I presume that's primarily out of your fund.
Hold on, if I answer that, that's like, when did you stop beating your wife, right?
Right.
So if I answer the question, there's rumors that you own 10% of Twitter. You do that out of your fund. If I say yes to I do that out of my fund, then I've conceded.
Beating your wife.
I own some,
but you own some Twitter. That's public knowledge.
Yeah, I was one of the early investors in Twitter.
As an angel.
Ev brought me in as an angel.
And then you did it out of your fund as well.
By the way, really funny story about that. Again, I didn't have a lot of money at the time. And Twitter didn't immediately click for me. Like, I thought it was fun. I didn't realize it was going to change the world.
Were you in Odeo first?
I was not in Odeo.
Okay.
Yeah. I was still working at Google at the time, and Google very much frowned upon me doing angel investing. And so Ev calls me up and is like, hey, dude, I got you down for 25. 25K, okay, I'll get you down for 25. And I'm like on the phone like that's a lot of money.
Right.
And like, I kind of got peer pressured into doing it. It's now like the greatest investment ever, but I can't really take credit for having like this vision that it was going to change the world. Like, Ev totally hooked me up on that.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so Ev and Jack and Biz have always been like 2 steps ahead of everyone else in realizing what Twitter's doing. And then Dick Costlow and I were like the early advisors and investors, and we're always kind of playing catch up to those guys a little bit. And then we were always kind of a half step ahead of the general populace who's like, I don't get it, or how's it ever going to make money? And so I started to get the religion pretty soon. And so I not only followed on in other rounds, but I started buying it from employees and investors. And like before the secondary markets really popped up, I started just kind of, if somebody would leave Twitter, I'd buy $50,000 worth of their shares and stuff like that. So I started buying.
You're buying this stuff up along the way. I mean, you have to believe quite a bit in Twitter's ability to eventually monetize. I'm a shareholder as well, and I say this because somebody the other day said to me, they're like, Twitter reminds me of instant messaging. Like, it was never able to really monetize. Like, there's a lot of really short little messages going out there, but I mean,
I don't believe that at all,
actually. But do you get a little bit nervous sitting on such a big stake that, if something goes sideways, you're kind of
Okay, I'm still not admitting the size of the stake in the company, but I have a stake in Twitter, and I'm really bullish on that company.
How do you?
But I deeply, deeply believe in Twitter as a business, and I mean a real business. Like, data just came out today from Compete that shows how commercial the traffic is and how it actually converts to sales.
Right.
More so on Twitter than on Facebook even.
But how do you monetize that? As Twitter, the corporation?
Yeah, so what's happened in the display advertising business forever is you put a billboard up on the 101 and you have no idea about the performance of that ad, right? There's no actual linkage.
Sure.
So in the early days of Google, a Google ad just dropped you off at the front door of a website.
Right.
Zappos would advertise and be like, here's Zappos.com, have a good one.
Right.
And so
this is our click-through rate, blah,
right.
blah, right.
There was no actual linkage to a purchase, right? So Google goes out and buys Urchin to make Google Analytics, and now they can start tracking the clicks all the way through to conversion event.
Right, transaction
And
level.
now instead of hand-wavy bullshit, ads are being sold on math,
Right.
right? This ad is worth exactly $32.83,
Right.
not a penny more, not a penny less.
Right.
If you're willing to bid less, if you're only bidding less, you're leaving money on the table, that kind of thing. And so the math really moved into that because you had this closed feedback loop. So what's possible on Twitter today is the richest feedback loop of data we've ever had because it adds the component of mobile that Google never really had. So you can literally watch how a tweet, whether it's a tweet view or a link in a tweet, kind of goes up, how it fans out, who influences it, where it gets clicked on, what conversion that might lead to later, how many social interactions happen around that, whether it's retweets, faves, replies, that kind of stuff. And you could actually link it to Foursquare check-ins. You could actually link it to where the phone went, what the location of that phone was. Like, you can see how those tweets fan out across Facebook and how they fan out across Blogger.
I totally get all that.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me. The problem that I'm having is that, like, you know, when Google AdSense was described to me for the first time, it just like made sense to me. I'm like, oh, an ad on Google search results. I type in a keyword, there's the ad, that's what I pay for. It clicks through, right? What is the ad product there? What is the Twitter product where this is like, I give Twitter money, this is what I get, and this is what I can track? Like,
yeah. Well, when you have that accountability loop, now you can start informing the value of promoted tweets, of promoted accounts, of promoted trends. So just this last week, the studio behind Super 8 did a special preview day only for Twitter. You needed a Twitter-related password you can only discover if you're on Twitter, to go to secret studios or secret movie theaters around the country that were premiering Super 8. And so they did $1.5 million worth of sales. Like, it was 100,000 people went to see that movie only through Twitter as a preview. So not only did it generate buzz, but you can directly link that to $1.5 million worth of sales, right? And they came out all happy. Everyone's thrilled about it. It blew out. It did a huge, huge weekend. The studio is already saying like that a lot of that's thanks to Twitter. And so that closed feedback loop on how promoting things over Twitter impacted that movie now raises the value of those different advertising products, right? And so the clearer the analytical linkage between those events, the more valuable this advertising is. And so if you're a CMO right now trying to figure out where to put your ad dollars, like in an environment like this, a tough business environment, you need some accountability. You can't just spray and pray anymore.
Right.
And so as you put them into these places where you're like, look, I mean, that's why it was kind of easy for Groupon to get started, is there's a lot of accountability in that advertisement, right? You only actually pay for it when it's redeemed.
Right.
And so, you know, that's a pretty low risk model.
we pay for it up head,
So, yeah.
and then it either gets redeemed or it doesn't get redeemed.
Right. But you know what I mean? Like there's very clear, like in the case of Groupon, you have a very clear association between what it costs and how many of them actually happen because you're tied into the transaction, right? I mean, there's a spectrum I have in my mind all the time, like from left to right for the viewers at home. So it's basically billboards out on the road, like low performance, no idea. You start getting into like television, radio, print. We have some idea of circulation. The Nielsen numbers are always very flimsy. I mean, how do you know how many people looked at an ad page in a magazine? Arbitron for radio is a joke.
Yeah.
And so, but a little more accountable than the billboard on the side of the 101.
Right.
You move down, you get into digital CPM. Like here, okay, we at least know the denominator. We don't know how many people actually interact with the ad, but we know how many people actually kind of saw that ad, right? You get into that category of CPE. You're like, somebody might have hovered over the ad, maybe seen a quick video. They didn't necessarily click. We didn't drive any user action. You get into that CPC stuff. Now you're like, okay, now at least I know I prompted a user to go to a place they weren't expecting to go to before. As we keep moving down, these things are getting more valuable, more accountable. Advertisers are willing to pay more. Yeah. Get into CPA, you delivered a lead. Like that's pretty valuable, right? Pay-per call, that kind of stuff. You get into a new type of ad category called door swing or cost per location. So if I know I delivered somebody to a physical premise, like, fuck you, pay me. Like, I got somebody into your store, that's a payable event, right?
Right, that's huge.
And so, yeah, even if I don't know what they bought there, I know I got them there, right? And so Foursquare and Goala are pioneering, like, let's get somebody to, and to register that they're there, and then we can figure out the intent loop that got them there and get paid on that. Coupons are one step further. Now you can actually see, like, not only I get them there, but I actually got them to transact. So give me a piece of that transaction.
There's other downsides to coupons, though.
Sure.
Yeah.
Like,
huge
but
downsides.
as we move across the spectrum, each one of these is much more accountable.
Right.
And the relationship between the ad unit and the conversion. I mean, the very last one is a place where Square is better positioned than anyone, and that's if you're the payment method,
Right.
if you're fully integrated at the point of sale, dude, you can start plugging in any of these data points and you know exactly their performance metric, right?
Yep.
I mean, I think Square and Twitter are perfect complements to each other in that respect. And so that's that's why I get very confident about Twitter being an incredible business. And I mean, it shows the number of advertisers they have right now and the way the money's starting to stack up over there.
Yeah.
Like, it's a real business. And so certainly there are people that are wasting time saying this is what I had for lunch.
Right.
But businesses are starting to realize there's some real data and really tight feedback loops being built there.
It's fun to watch the evolution of this stuff too. Like there was a lot of, this is where I went to lunch back a couple of years ago, or this is who I'm hanging out with. Remember when it was like, I'm hanging out with at this person, at this person, at this person.
Right.
And now that's all gone.
Yeah.
And it's like, now it's more news centric and like link sharing, it's fascinating. But
it was very like GroupMe, Fast Society, or whatever in the early days. It was very much, that's how we all used it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I remember one night I was at a concert where all these Cameo people kept dropping in, like Slash played, and then Herbie Hancock showed up, and I kept tweeting each one, and I lost half my followers in one night, because I think I only had like 40 followers that night, and they're all like, dude, this is Twitteria, because back then, it was all text too. Like your phone would just blow up.
And South by Southwest was horrible for that, because we'd be tweeting so much, like people would just be like, stop tweeting, I'm not there. You know?
Your phone would just blow up.
That's funny. So you have a very large fund. I know you don't disclose how big it is, but I've heard it's very large. And so you're doing lots of big deals. Are you still doing small deals out there? Like still kind of startup type stuff? Like
yeah.
And what are you looking for?
Yeah.
I always try to a lot of entrepreneurs are watching this, or would-be entrepreneurs, people that are getting started. And I had Tony Conrad on one time, and one of the questions I asked him was like, what gets you excited right now? Like, what are the things that you look for in a startup when you're making an investment?
Yeah. So I am still doing some startup investment, not as much. I think the market got ahead of itself. I think prices just got kind of redonkulous, and there's a certain entitlement among a lot of founders that stuff that hasn't even been built yet or hasn't been launched or doesn't have any users is worth double-digit millions of dollars right up front, and I think they've pushed so hard on terms that while it's a great environment to be an entrepreneur, it's not a great environment to be a seed stage investor. And so I really pared back on trying to build a portfolio of those investments. There are key investments that I would just never not do. I'm an investor in milk. There's just no way I wouldn't do that deal. If Evan Williams ever started something new, it's just like I would write him a blank check. Even after I'd pared back on my investment, the Instagram boys came along and gave me an opportunity to invest in that company, and that was just a no-brainer.
Yeah, absolutely.
I deeply admire Kevin and Mikey, like the velocity of like users on that company.
What they've got done with such a small team.
Yeah,
I'm gonna have
4 guys.
I'm gonna have Kevin come on and do one of these shows. It'll be awesome.
If you have Kevin come here, that like we can directly see the productivity of that company go down, because there's only 4 guys in the building over there building that thing.
Yeah, when I first met them, those 2 guys, it was only the 2 of them, and we were having tea at Samwar. This is before you made your investment, because you were out of town or something. You were about to make your investment, and like they honestly were like sitting there, and they're like, "Oh shit, the server might be down." And they're like, "Oh, it's AT&T. It's back up. It's up." Like they had no idea,
right.
and they were getting like they were at that point. It was insane. They were doing like a 1 image upload like every couple seconds, and like now I'm sure it's even crazier than that.
Yeah, it's 5 million users on the site now.
That's nuts. Yeah, this was like a couple 100,000 users back then.
Yeah, I think they do in a week what Flickr did in its first year or something like that.
Insane.
Paris Lemon wrote. I'd double check that, but it's crazy scale. But so I've reserved money for really key, seed deals. So Turntable's an example of that right now. I mean, I'd be freaked out if I didn't have the money to participate in a turntable offering, something like that. But
it is fun.
But generally, I'm not going and doing a broad basket of startups the way I used to. I do have more capital to draw upon than I have in the past, and so I've been doing some larger secondary deals. I've also been doing some primary deals, where I come in and do kind of a momentum round for a company that's already succeeding, and I've been writing double-digit million checks into those companies and trying to keep it quiet. I think fundraising right now can be a real distraction for a founding team, so I probably move quicker than anybody else out there to get deals done. And then we don't even really do any announcements around it at all, just because I think that can not only be a distraction, but it can tip off competitors. And so we just do it really quietly and move on. I'll actually, hat tip to Perry Chen at Kickstarter was the very first guy who, once we signed the papers to invest a couple years ago in a seed round, he actually asked me not to tweet about it. I'm like, what are you talking about, dude? I love Kickstarter. This is awesome. He's like, I really don't want other VCs to realize this is a hot space and that Fred Wilson's invested in all, like all these guys who are kind of like validators. He's like, I don't want anyone to know you guys are invested because all it's going to do is bring more investment into competitors.
Right.
And so it's the very first time I was told to be quiet. And at first I didn't get it, and now I totally get it. Like, Perry and Nancy went and kicked total ass, and they're category winners at Kickstarter now. And probably a lot of that is because, we all stayed quiet.
Yeah.
While he just silently murdered everybody else out there and just crushed it. So, yeah.
So what do you look for in an entrepreneur? Like what qualities are you looking for? Is it all about the ideas, about founders, about a mixture of the two?
Yeah. I mean, I'm still figuring that out. So the first filter I have is this a product I feel like I could be helpful with? Right? And I've missed really good deals because I feel like I don't know anything about the space. I passed on Zynga. I'm going to start naming some of these and they're going to amount to the billions of dollars, right? So I passed on Zynga because I'm like, I don't really know gaming. Like, I don't know the partnerships in Asia. I don't know, and Pincus talked to me about maybe an opportunity to join the team there. And I'm like, dude, I don't know the space. I don't think I can be that helpful. Like, it would have been, in retrospect, cool to put in dumb money or whatever, but I just didn't know how that thing worked. I passed on Gilt Group. Like, I've never been to a sample sale. I didn't realize what a big thing it was. I mean, I dress like this, Like, I had no idea how much money people spent on clothes and how rad that business would be. And I knew the entrepreneurs and they're really admirable people.
You never still use Gilt Group to date?
No, I've never used Gilt Group.
I'll let you know if they have like a Western sale or something.
All right. I passed on Airbnb. I was just like, who sleeps on people's couches, et cetera. I mean, these are all like multi-billion-dollar businesses now that I didn't think I'd either use or that I could be that helpful with. Like in the case of Gilt, what am I going to do for the Gilt Group founding team, right? They're already excellent entrepreneurs, and I'm like, am I going to hook them up with awesome designers? Am I going to bring a bunch of people to their site? Like, I don't know. And so the first filter for me is this something I feel like I could be helpful with? Mm-hmm. From there, I don't know if I've built a really great system for figuring this stuff out. As a VC, I'm wrong most of the time. And so whenever any VC tells you about the rules, et cetera, it's really funny because we're wrong all the time, right? In my portfolio, you should expect me to be wrong most of the time. When I'm right, I'm really, really right? That's what you should expect from a VC.
Yeah, that's how you're going to get your returns.
Yeah, is that sometimes I just nail it, and hopefully those will outpace all the things where I was like, for whatever reason, it just didn't pan out.
So you get in and then you hopefully do follow-on rounds from that point forward.
Yeah, any VC will tell you where they really make their money is in following on.
Yeah.
It's doubling back down into their winners, the things that are growing geometrically in terms of users, revenue, that kind of stuff. I mean, I do try and focus a lot on the entrepreneur as a person. I think that's fallen out of this equation recently, and so I'm intrigued. I think there's a lot of blog posts out there about how to look for driven people and, but I look for a few things. First, I don't like to work with anyone who hasn't had a shitty job at some point in their life. I mean, working for tips, grinding it out, hourly, working for parolees at some point.
I made breadsticks at Olive Garden.
Yeah, right?
I smelled like garlic for like 2.5 years.
You gotta have a job like that.
I can make a kick-ass breadstick though.
Really? Has Olive Garden ever served a kick-ass breadstick?
Yes, yeah? kind of. It's good for soaking up the minestrone soup.
So, you know what I'm saying? Like, you need those jobs, like you can tell who's had those jobs and who hasn't. You can tell on the first day of working someone whether they've ever been in that job or not. Around the time I was getting ready to leave Google, we had a generation of computer science students who were showing up there who'd never had real jobs because they were paid to go to school. The worst thing they'd ever done is maybe TA'd. Their summers were spent at computer camp or something like that. And I swear, we would see people walk up to the chefs and be like, what? No fucking pheasant? You ran on the fucking pheasant? What the fuck? And you're like, dude, are you shitting me? They give us free breakfast, lunch, and dinner from organic and locally sourced cuisine all day. You can have your friends come here and eat, and you're complaining there's no pheasant? It's totally, like, the entitlement was crazy. Yeah, it was, and so I think, like, rule number one is I look for people who've had a shitty job, because even in our worst day in our industry now, like, it doesn't compare to a really shitty day of true ass-busting work. And so, number two, I look for people who've lived, traveled, or studied abroad. I think it forces humility on you. You know, like, in our environment, we're totally in control. We can go to our favorite places. We speak the language. You show up in another country, you don't speak the language, and you're just like, and you have to walk up to perfect strangers and ask them for directions. You have to figure out shit to eat. Like, your head is spinning the whole time. Jet lag's on top of you, that kind of stuff. Like, I really think that builds an implicit humility and resourcefulness and collaboration in people. So I look for that a lot. I look for people who play sports, and whether it's team sports or individual sports, I don't care about, but I do care that they have some balance in their life and they have some source of endorphins that keep them kind of like healthy, and that they have some boundaries when they know to kind of turn off the switch and go outside a little bit.
Throw the ball around a little bit.
Yeah, I just think, honestly, it just makes for more well-rounded people, and I think ideas come from those kind of people. Like the really true self-destructive Mountain Dew type guzzlers and stuff like that, whose bodies fall apart, et cetera, they're not actually driving the creativity in this valley. They're not conceiving of the new ideas. They're not coming up with cool shit. It's the people who have these broader life experiences, who have balanced relationships, who come up with the cool shit. And so,
College degree, no college degree, does that matter to you?
College degree is not a prerequisite, but it is kind of funny, like doing well in college, I do think does correlate for me with the successful people I've worked with. And so I don't think that's a prerequisite at all. But I do think like college done right, like particularly like a liberal arts school, is a lot less about the individual facts you learn and more about learning how to think, learning how to communicate, like experimenting with personal boundaries, getting laid, drinking too much, like taking the time to go abroad. I worry that like CS students these days don't have any time in their schedule to go abroad anymore. Like, and yet like living in Latin America and Europe like kicked my ass and taught me all kinds of cool shit and just made me, more interesting. And so the last thing I was gonna say is I look for interesting people that I want to spend time with. You'll hear a lot of people say like, I have this test, would I be willing to sit next to them on a plane from New York to LA or whatever, New York to San Francisco. For me, it's, I think I told you, I bought the house next door to my house up in Truckee. I live up in Lake Tahoe.
Yeah.
And it's called Camp Lowercase. And Camp Lowercase is where the portfolios come up one by one and do retreats. And like, for me, it's like, would I have these guys up to my house? Would I break bread with these guys? Like, am I comfortable like spending that kind of time with them? Would I find it interesting, enriching? Do their ideas kind of inspire me and get me eager to help them out? And so that's a big filter for me too. Because dude, like at the end of the day, like hopefully we're all gonna make money, but I hope I reflect upon this time as being fulfilling, as meeting interesting people, as being fun,
absolutely.
healthy. Like it's just not worth it.
For sure.
Otherwise we'd all go work for hedge funds and be miserable. But out here, hopefully we're infusing some humanity and some actual, like we're building cool shit that people like and that makes the world a better place. And so, hopefully our business falls in line with that.
Have you ever made like a bet like solely on an individual but not an idea? Like I'm not gonna say which company it is, but I made an investment here just probably about 6 months ago in this startup where I wasn't too sure about the idea, but I sat down with the entrepreneur and I was like, this dude is brilliant. Like this might not be the idea, but he'll make this work somehow.
Dude, if Evan Williams told me he was getting into the grilled cheese business, he would have a blank check for me. Evan always figures it out. Like he just has insights that are way ahead of mine. In fact, Evan and I have a relationship that he knows that if I object to something, then it's the right thing to do. And like multiple times along the way, I've been like, no way, users will hate that, or that's so dumb, you're gonna kill the company, and every time it's been right.
That's awesome.
And so I'm the key contraindicator to Evan Williams, and I would back anything he did.
That's
and
amazing.
So I haven't done a lot of that. I've tried to really get my head around the product and see if I can be helpful, but I'm not ruling it out.
Yeah. So lastly, any URLs, anything you want to push people to have them check out more about what you're doing?
Well, I have everything at lowercasellc.com. And up there I kind of list all the posse, that's what I call the guys in my portfolio. I talked about my ethos a little bit, how to pitch, that kind of stuff. So,
awesome.
So lowercasellc.com.
No full-time blog or anything?
I'd like to get back into that.
I hate blogging. It's the worst.
I have a lot I want to write.
It takes too long.
Probably a little longer than 140 characters. I'm like you. I take my shit seriously, and so I can't just throw a post up. I really want to edit it and work on it.
It's easier just to fire up video and like shoot something real quick and then put that on your blog.
Yeah, but it's that's why. Think of how long it takes for our buddies to write those books, though, too, and then deal with that whole editing process. Like Tony and Gary and these guys who put those books out, and Tim, all these guys. That's an even worse process. And so I like.
But at least they get to do that. Like Tim, I'm talking to him, like he's in a different country like every other week. He's like, I'm just chilling on the beach, writing my book. Like that's pretty badass too.
Yeah, I do my business from Truckee, so I don't really have a lot of complaints. We get bears and coyotes in the yard, and I ski on powder days.
That's right. We were using that. Last time I was at your house, we were using a deer call or whatever.
The predator call.
I was trying to call bears into his backyard.
Nobody believed it. And so, and I think Prager ultimately cited the coyotes. Like,
I was out there for a good 15, 20 minutes trying to call like bears in your backyard.
I don't have any complaints. I think these days we can get business done from where we get business done. And particularly if we can be healthy and productive, it just gets nailed. And so, yeah, I don't have any, I mean, I don't envy these guys who write books. Imagine if what you wrote had to be so true that by the time that thing hit shelves 7 or 8 months later, it was still true. That scares the hell out of me, right?
Yeah.
Most of what we said during this podcast, I will have wanted to change those answers by tomorrow.
Well, look, go back and read like Bill Gates' original, like The Road Ahead book.
Right.
It's awesome. now it's become, before it was like, oh, some of that isn't true. And now it's just hilarious and awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks for being on the show.
Right on, dude.
Appreciate it.
Awesome seeing you.